The goal of this video is to provide an overview of several of the verb exercises from chapter 14 in our book. This chapter focused on subject-verb agreement, and what I'm going to do in this video is essentially break down the sentences into different parts to help you figure out how to identify for these errors and also understand how various elements of the sentence work together. For this exercise, the authors were wanting you to think about subject-verb agreement in relationship to prepositional phrases. So often prepositional phrases come in between a verb and its subject, so it can create some confusion about what the number or the tense of the verb should be. So for this first sentence, we have since reuse requires a supportive environment, and this is what's called an introductory phrase, which is offset with a comma. This is not the prepositional phrase. It's just an introductory phrase, and we can check it here too. So since is that word that introduces that phrase, reuse is the subject, requires is the verb, it's singular, so the verb is singular. A supportive environment is your noun phrase, which is the object of the verb. But because it has this word since to start with, it makes this dependent on the main clause, which is what follows. So the next part, a set of environmental reuse enablers are discussed. This is the main clause of the sentence. So a set is the subject, it is singular. The prepositional phrase of environmental reuse enablers is actually an adjective. It describes set. It adds more information. So prepositional phrases function as modifiers in sentences. So they are either adjectives or adverbs. If they're adjectives, they're describing a noun. If they're adverbs, they're describing a verb. So in this case, the set is the subject. So if you just want to remove the prepositional phrase, you might immediately see the error. A set are discussed. So set is singular, are is plural. So instead of are, you should have is. So the next one, the combination of inspection, replacement, and protective sheathing. This is all your subject. It's all one big subject. So if we want to break it down, the combination of, so all of this is the prepositional phrase that's describing the combination. So you would split it between the combination, and you could take out of inspection, replacement, and protective sheathing. So if once you remove that, you have the combination have all helped, and there again you see the error. So it'd be has all helped because the verb is singular, because combination is the actual subject of the verb. But you can hear there how it'd be really easy if you were just editing or quickly writing to commit this error and to miss it if you were editing. So the combination of inspection, replacement, and protective sheathing makes it sound plural if you're not paying attention to the fact that this prepositional phrase is describing combination and it isn't functioning as the subject of the sentence. So if we want to continue on, so has all helped. To successfully is preclude is so successfully is an adverb that describes preclude. This is what's called an infinitive verb phrase. Any such similar failure to date. So all of this is descriptive of how it's precluded. So in the last sentence, another novel component of the feather sail concept. So another novel component. So another is a descriptor for novel component, which is singular. So novel component is your noun phrase that's describing, or I'm sorry, novel is describing component, another is describing the entire phrase, but component is your subject. It's also singular. You have the of, the feather sail concept is that prepositional phrase that's also describing component. So you get all my arrows here. So if you take out all of the other bits of this, you would just have another component. And then again, you would hear that are is wrong, and it should be is for extendable thin film solar cell arrays. So hopefully that helps you understand how you can see those prepositional phrases. So they often start with of if they're adding more information. You have a whole list of other kinds of prepositionals or prepositions that can start prepositional phrases. But whenever you see a prepositional phrase, you should immediately understand that it's describing something. So it's either modifying a verb or a noun, and you want to check and see how it goes with that, but it doesn't impact the verb itself. So in this next exercise, the authors were wanting to test you on the ways that indefinite pronouns impact the sentence and verb, subject, verb agreement. So each in this first sentence is an indefinite pronoun, and it automatically makes everything singular because you divide it up by each one, and that makes the verb need to agree with it in a singular sense. So you have each, which is your actual verb, or the indefinite pronoun, so it's standing in for all of the things that it's referring to each. And then you have this prepositional phrase again, of the 3 cloud top height estimate methods, and it gives some detail. So all of that is your prepositional phrase, but the verb needs to agree with each. So it would be has been evaluated, which is your entire noun or verb phrase. And then using a set of da 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 is an adverbial phrase that's describing how it's been evaluated. So then there's an extra error in this one. So using a set of 769 daytime pilot reports. So this is tricky. So a set, so here's a noun phrase. A set is the subject. This is your prepositional phrase of 769 daytime pilot reports. Here you have an indefinite, or sorry, a relative pronoun. So it actually would be that because I think you need it. It's a restrictive phrase. But then gives is the verb here, and it needs to match the subject, which is singular. So it would say gives. A set gives observed. A set that gives observed cloud top height. So just pay attention to that kind of thing as well. The second one is the same error. So upon polymerization of the silicon, there is produced. So there's that there is thing here. You just want to check and make sure that what follows the is singular. So this is your introductory phrase. And then we have this dummy subject there. And what follows the verb needs to match. So this is singular, so it's a continuous medium. So we can keep going. Continuous medium or cell body through which a hole may be bored, so that each, and then we have the each, so there's that indefinite pronoun again, and then we have a prepositional phrase, each of the units. And so since this is singular, and this should be also singular, so it should be is. So each is in fluid communication. So again, take out the prepositional phrases, move things around. What I like to do is break up sentences into their pieces and just sort of check to make sure each of those pieces matches. So we can see sort of the dividing lines between a lot of those elements. So on the previous slide, I talked about that dummy subject there, and often the subject-verb agreement error that happens is that what follows there has to agree with the verb that goes with there. We do this all the time in speaking, and I actually have noticed when I'm captioning my videos that I record for this class and for other classes that I commit this subject-verb agreement error all the time. So it's pretty common to hear it in speaking, and it's easy for it to pop up in writing as well. So here we have there, which is the technical subject of the sentence, but sort of as a stand-in. So has been, and then you want to make sure that because this is singular, that what follows it is singular. So that's your verb phrase. And then several decision support models. So this is kind of tricky because it's a long noun phrase with lots of adjectives. So several, and then decision support models is a compound noun. So it's easy to kind of get confused about like, is it singular or plural? But models is the decision support models is the entire unit, and it's plural. So this would need to be have. So there have been several decision support models developed in the literature for assisting organizations and outsourcing practices in the private sector. And I would actually put a "the" there. I think you could probably have private sector without an article, but it sounds a little confusing. And the rest of the sentence makes sense and sounds okay. The next one, there seems to be several alternatives to the above procedures. On hearing this, it sounds okay. And keep in mind, too, that other verbs besides to be verbs can follow there. So you can have there seems, there exists, anything that goes with that. But, so there seems to be, we have a whole verb, an infinitive verb phrase, several alternatives, and there's our plural. So this is a plural, and it needs to match, and I may have corrected it when I typed it out. So there seems to be several alternatives to the above procedures. But it's plural, so it needs to be, this needs to be seem. There seem to be several alternatives to the above procedures. So as you can hear, I had to sit there and think through it for a second because in talking, I kind of forgot to think about how that all connect together. But anyway, so that needs to be plural to match alternatives. So exercise 4 was focusing on compound subjects, and compound subjects are subjects that are combined together with a coordinating conjunction. So your coordinating conjunctions are typically for compound subjects and, or. So whenever you see an and or an or, it should signal to you to pay attention to see what's going on there. If it's not a compound subject, it could be a coordinating conjunction to combine two independent or dependent clauses. So you'd want to pay attention to see if you need a comma. So either way, coordinating conjunctions do a lot of different things in sentences. So this first example, because of the fuselage and tank cross-section, so we have the fuselage with your coordinating conjunction and tank cross-section. So individually, those are singular, but your and functions as a plus sign to make this entire subject plural. So because of the fuselage and cross-tank sections were kept constant, so were kept is your verb phrase for weight and manufacturing purposes. So all of this here, because it starts with because, this is called a subordinating conjunction. This makes all of this phrase a dependent clause, and this is your main phrase. So because of the fuselage and cross-tank sections were kept constant for weight and manufacturing purposes, you can't have that be by itself, so it's dependent on the next clause. It was necessary to make the entire nacelle external to the fuselage. So nothing is wrong here. It was necessary so this is a subject, and here is your verb phrase. It's singular, was necessary is also singular. It's a passive form where it uses that dummy subject again with it. So, but nothing is wrong with subject verb agreement in that part of the sentence, but it's good to see how we have that dependent clause paired up with the main clause, and you have it offset with a comma. A rigorous analysis was not performed here because isotopic material and fracture behavior. So we have a rigorous analysis, which is your subject, was not performed here. So was not performed is your verb phrase. Analysis is singular, your verb is singular, so everything is cool here. So a rigorous analysis was not performed here. All of this is your main clause. And you know, when you get to the because, that this is a subordinating conjunction, which means it makes whatever follows dependent on the main clause. So just like the example before, it signaled that that first chunk of the sentence is dependent on the main clause that follows. This one attaches the dependent clause to the main clause after. But it does still contain a subject and a verb. So because isotopic materials, and then we have that lovely and fracture behavior. So again, singular paired up with singular, but it's plus sign. So this would be were assumed. That's your verb phrase. And therefore results should only be viewed as approximate. And I would actually put all of this is together. So because isotopic material and fracture analysis was assumed, and I would put a comma here because what follows is also an independent clause. So a fairly complicated sentence here, but hopefully me breaking this down can help you start to understand how you can see how those chunks connect. And this is a coordinating conjunction that brings together two independent clauses. So you need a comma to join them together. So results should only be viewed as approximate, can stand alone, but it's not part of the dependent clause that starts with because. So exercise 5 continued having you think about compound subjects and number agreement. And the one before really focused on the coordinating conjunctions of and, but if you have the coordinating conjunction with or, that does not bring the two together. So whenever you see or, whatever is closest to the verb is what affects what number the verb should be in. And nor is obviously also the same. So you have nor and or, which are another set of coordinating conjunctions. So in this first example, it's a neither nor kind of thing. So since neither VGM nor gridgen, and that's singular and singular, both of these are singular, you don't add them together. So it'd be has an interpolation capability for different topologies. And then there was actually this weird typo in the text, but you take that little period out. The TechPilot software was used. So the software singular was used. All of this first part is actually an introductory phrase. You see that since, and it signals that introductory phrase. So you have that comma, and this is actually your main phrase in the sentence. And this whole first part is dependent on it. So it introduces a concept that's then extended into the text. So for the second example, it starts, an interesting observation is that not only the sensory cells, but also many supporting cells are provided with kinocilia. So this one is kind of tricky because your main verb is actually right here. So an interesting observation is that not only the sensory cells, but also the many supporting cells is all one big subject. And obviously you would break that down into a couple of chunks. So here you have an interesting observation, and then is what's called a linking verb here. And what follows is actually a subject complement. So not only the sensory cells, but also many supporting cells is describing the interesting observation. You also have not only the sensory cells, which is plural, but also many supporting cells. And that's that plus. But also adds. And so it's all plural. So you get to your verb are, and it's correct. It turns out this one was completely correct. And I have to say, this gave me some pause because I was trying to find the error. And so often you just break it down, take a look, see how everything relates together, and that can help you determine if there's an error or not. And so here they did not have an error, but I think they were trying to trick you a little bit with the but also, because but sort of feels like or in some ways, like it should be separating, but also is connecting it together. So just keep that in mind as well. So our final exercise was looking at errors in subject-verb-person agreement. And so often when you get people in there, it's easy to makes different errors depending if you're thinking about things as singular or plural. So in this first sentence, you or your representative is the subject of the sentence, but you see that coordinating conjunction or, and so that should immediately signal to you that whatever is closest to the verb should be affecting the number of the verb. Your representative is singular. And so even though there are two people in the subject, your verb should be singular because the noun closest to the verb separated by the or is representative. And so you or your representative is entitled. And it sounds kind of funky, but that's how it works. So you or your representative is entitled to see the records of measurement of your exposure to MDA upon written request to your employer. So you or your representative is entitled to see, which is a infinitive verb phrase. So to see what? The records, which is your object of measurements of your exposure to MDA, is one nice long prepositional phrase which describes your record. So it's working as an adjective upon written request to your employer. So another descriptive phrase there. Upon is another prepositional phrase, so it's actually operating as a adverb because it's describing the conditions in which you can see the records. So the next one, you can file a complaint for child support in Montgomery County Circuit Court, and I think I mistyped that, so sorry about that. If you or the non-custodial parent, both of which are singular, so you as the subject, can, file is your verb. So a complaint is the object for child support in Montgomery County. So for child support in Montgomery County, those are two prepositional phrases. The filing, the complaint for child support. So this is describing complaint, and in Montgomery County is where you can file it. So it's another prepositional phrase that describes where you can file. So it's an adverb. So if is a subordinating conjunction. So it's making what follows a dependent clause. It's reliant on this first main clause, but it still has a subject and a verb. So you have you, or there's your coordinating conjunction. The non-custodial parent. So this non-custodial parent is singular, and that means that your verb would be singular as well. So if you or the non-custodial parent lives in Montgomery County. And again, with you, it's easy for this to trip up a writer or an editor, because on sort of first hearing, it's a little bit hard to hear it or to challenge or to figure out the error and to hear if it's right or wrong unless you stop to take a look at it. So while you should rely on your instincts and your ear, and often that can help you figure things out, sometimes you have to just stop and know the rule and how to apply it. So hopefully this video helped you see some of the ways that you can break up sentences into the different pieces, and that you can often remove those pieces out of the sentence as a way to figure out the relationship between subjects and verbs. And by removing those pieces out, it also can help you see like those modular units of those prepositional phrases can often help you figure out what goes with what in a sentence. And that often can help you either move those elements around later to create clarity, or just figure out if there's a subject-verb agreement error, as is the case with most of these exercises.